She stood barefoot in the storm, clutching a newborn to her chest, while the townspeople watched from behind their curtains, silent, judging. No one knew where the baby came from, but somehow, everyone believed it was hers. Worse, they whispered that the baby belonged to her and her blind father-in-law. Why would an entire town believe something so twisted? And what were they planning to do to her? You're listening to Hidden Stories Now, and this is where Emily Carter's nightmare began. Emily carefully led her blind father-in-law to the back of the house, where she would heat water over a fire and gently wash the dust and grime from his frail body. It was an act of devotion, of love. But the townspeople, they saw something else. A young woman spending that much time alone with an old blind man? Suspicious, don't you think? She's only staying to get the land in the house. No woman would do this out of kindness. There's something unnatural about their relationship. It didn't matter what she did. The town had made up its mind, and now they were waiting for her to fall. Their home sat on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, a small town tucked between rolling hills and dense forest. It was isolated, a relic of an older time, a place where people watched from behind curtains and whispered behind backs, a place where secrets were buried deep, and Emily's presence there? A disturbance in their perfect little world. Her father-in-law, James Carter, hadn't always been blind. Years ago, he was a strong man, a devoted father, until the accident. A falling branch took his sight, and from that day forward, his son, Daniel, became his eyes. They had survived together, until Daniel's sudden death, and now only Emily remained. Daniel had promised her the world. He was kind, hard-working, full of dreams. But one rainy night, everything changed. He left for work at the lumber mill, and never came home. A co-worker arrived at her doorstep, breathless. "Emily, it's Daniel. There was an accident." Her heart stopped. She rushed to the mill, her vision blurred by rain and tears. And there, lying on the cold, muddy ground, was her husband. Gone. James Carter didn't cry. He just sat on the front porch, his lifeless eyes staring into the distance. "Daniel is gone," he finally whispered, "and now only you and I remain." In the days following Daniel's death, the town's whispers grew louder. Why is she still there? A widow living alone with her father-in-law? That's not right. Maybe she had something to do with Daniel's accident. Emily ignored them, but the town wasn't done with her yet. Because in Cedar Creek, once they decided you were guilty, nothing could change their minds. Behind it all, one woman watched, Helen Thompson, a woman who controlled Cedar Creek from the shadows, a woman who decided who rose and who fell. And now, her gaze had turned to Emily. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the old wooden shutters of the Carter house. Emily sat by the fire, holding a cup of tea in her trembling hands. James Carter sat across from her, silent as always. The warmth of the fire didn't chase away the cold in her bones, because tonight she had heard something new, a rumor that was worse than all the others. She had been in town that afternoon, picking up supplies. She tried to ignore the stares, the hushed conversations that stopped whenever she walked past. But then, a voice sharp and cruel cut through the marketplace. "Did you hear? They found a baby near her house." A baby? Yes, and no one knows where it came from. Emily froze. A baby? Near her house? That wasn't possible. But the whispers spread like wildfire, and soon the rumor took shape into something far worse. What if the baby is hers? She was always wearing loose clothes. Maybe she was hiding a pregnancy. But Daniel has been dead for months. Then whose child is it? You don't think? That old man. Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Emily felt sick. She rushed home, barely able to breathe. Was this another trick of the town? Or was someone setting her up? That evening, as the storm raged outside, Emily sat awake. Then, a sound. A faint, desperate cry. A baby's cry. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed a lantern and hurried to the door. The wind slammed against her, but she stepped outside. And then, just beneath the gnarled oak tree, she saw it, a small bundle, wrapped in damp cloth, shivering in the cold. A baby. Someone had left it there. Emily scooped the infant into her arms. The baby's skin was icy, its tiny body trembling. "Who would do this?" she whispered. But even as she rushed inside, cradling the child, she knew what the town would say. By morning, the entire town had heard the news, and the accusations came faster than Emily could prepare for. A baby at her doorstep? Convenient, isn't it? She must have been hiding it all along. There's only one explanation. The old man is the father. It's disgusting. We can't allow her to stay in this town. Emily wanted to scream. She wanted to shout the truth, but the truth didn't matter. The town already made up its mind. And in the center of it all, Helen Thompson smiled, because she had orchestrated every step of this. The morning light was cold and harsh as Emily stood on her porch, cradling the baby against her chest. She could feel the town watching her, from behind curtains, from across the dirt road, from the market, where the whispers never stopped. She should have expected this. She knew Cedar Creek never forgave, never forgot, and never let go of a scandal once it took root. James Carter sat on the porch, silent. He had heard the rumors. He knew what they were saying, but when Emily looked at him, his expression was unreadable. "What do we do?" Emily finally asked. James was quiet for a long moment. Then, in his hoarse, aged voice, he said, "We wait." But the town wasn't waiting. By noon, a crowd had gathered at the end of the road. They weren't approaching, not yet, but Emily could feel their hatred like a noose tightening around her throat. And in the center of them, she saw her, Helen Thompson, watching, waiting. And then she moved. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the house. The crowd parted for her like she was royalty. Emily stiffened as Helen approached the porch. The woman didn't speak right away. She just studied Emily, her cold gaze unreadable. Then she said, soft and smooth, "Emily, dear, you must be so tired." Emily didn't answer. Helen tilted her head. "I know this must be difficult for you. All this attention." She gestured vaguely toward the gathered crowd. "People are worried, Emily. This baby, its sudden appearance." Helen paused as if carefully selecting her words. Then she smiled. "But don't worry, I'm here to help." Emily felt her stomach turn. Helen never offered help, not unless it benefited her, and Emily wasn't stupid enough to believe in kindness now. She tightened her hold on the baby. "What do you want, Helen?" Helen sighed as if Emily had disappointed her. Emily, always so defensive." She took a slow step closer. "The truth is, people don't trust you." Her voice was gentle, but her words were a knife. "They think you're hiding something." She let the weight of that sentence settle, and then she said, "But I can make all of this go away." Emily's breath caught. Helen smiled like a snake. "All you have to do is leave. Take the baby, walk away. If you do that, I'll make sure no one comes after you." Helen's voice dropped to a whisper. "But if you stay, well," she shrugged. "This town can be very unforgiving." Emily felt 1,000 thoughts rush through her mind. Leave, run, disappear before the town could rip her apart. It would be so easy. But then, she looked at James. He was sitting still, listening. And when she met his blind eyes, she knew. If she left now, Helen would win. The town would never know the truth, and James would die alone. Emily took a deep breath, and then she did something that no one had ever dared to do before. She looked Helen Thompson in the eye and said no. Helen went completely still. The crowd stirred, murmuring. Emily's voice was firm. "I'm not leaving, Helen." Helen's smile vanished. Her expression darkened, her eyes turning sharp and cold. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Helen stepped back. She smoothed the front of her coat, and then with a small, amused chuckle, she said, "Very well." She turned, walked back toward the crowd, and as she did, she called over her shoulder, "Don't say I didn't warn you." Emily felt her stomach twist. She had made her choice. She had stood her ground. But now, the real fight would begin, because Helen wasn't going to stop. She was just getting started. The sky darkened over Cedar Creek, thick clouds rolling in like a warning. Emily stood on the porch, gripping the baby tightly. Helen had left, but the battle had just begun. By the next morning, the town had turned against her completely. When she walked through the market, people stepped away. When she passed the baker's shop, the woman turned her back. And when she tried to buy food, the vendor let the apples slip from his hands onto the ground. Then, wiping his palms on his apron, he muttered, "Filthy! I can't sell these anymore." The other shoppers laughed. Emily's stomach twisted. They were trying to starve her out. She walked away, shoulders tight. She wouldn't let them see her break, but deep down she was afraid. Helen's influence ran deeper than she had imagined, and if she didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive this. That night, something worse happened. She had just put the baby to sleep when a loud thud, then another. Something slammed against the side of the house. Emily's pulse spiked. She grabbed a lantern, stepped outside, and froze. Dead animals, strung up on the fence, their blood dripping into the dirt, and scrawled across her front door in large, jagged letters. "Leave." Her throat went dry. She turned sharply, searching the darkness. A shadow moved near the trees, then a low chuckle, a man's voice thick with amusement. "Wonder how long she'll last." Another voice whispering, "Not much longer." Then, footsteps retreating, vanishing into the night. Emily shut her eyes, gripping the lantern tightly. She had known this was coming. Helen was done whispering. She was sending a message, and Emily needed to answer. James speaks. Inside, James Carter sat in his chair, staring into nothing. Emily slammed the door behind her. "She's pushing me, James." Her voice shook with fury. "She wants me to break." James remained silent. Emily's breath was uneven. She wasn't going to cry, but God, she wanted to. Finally, James spoke. His voice was hoarse, careful. "What do you plan to do?" Emily turned, staring at him. "Fight." The old man exhaled. For the first time, his expression softened. He reached forward, his trembling hand searching. Emily stepped closer. He found her hand, gripped it, and then his voice steadied. "Then fight." Emily closed her eyes, grounding herself. She had stood up to Helen once. She would do it again. Because if she didn't, Helen would bury her alive. The next day, Emily walked into town, alone. Eyes followed her every move. She could hear the whispers, but she didn't stop. She walked straight to Helen's house and knocked. The door creaked open. A housekeeper stood there, startled. Emily's voice was calm but firm. "Tell Helen I'd like to speak with her." The woman hesitated. Then, a voice from inside. "Let her in." Emily stepped inside. The trap had been set. But this time, Helen wouldn't be the one pulling the strings. Helen's house was nothing like the rest of Cedar Creek. Where other homes were modest, hers was grand, pristine, and untouched by time. A house that commanded power. And today, Emily was walking straight into the lion's den. The housekeeper led Emily down the hallway. The walls were lined with portraits of Helen's ancestors, men and women who had ruled Cedar Creek from the shadows for generations. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume. Then, the doors to the study swung open, and there she was, Helen Thompson, sitting elegantly behind her mahogany desk, a cup of tea in hand. She barely looked up. "Emily, darling, what a surprise." Emily stepped forward. She wasn't going to play games. "You sent people to my house last night." Helen arched an eyebrow. "Oh?" She took a slow sip of tea. "Now why would I do something like that?" Emily's fingers curled into fists. "You think you can scare me? Make me run?" Helen smiled. "Scare you? My dear, I think you misunderstand." She leaned forward, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm simply giving you options." She placed the teacup down carefully. "Leave Cedar Creek, and I'll make sure no harm comes to you." Her eyes darkened. "Stay, and I can't promise what happens next." Emily felt a cold chill run down her spine, but she wouldn't let Helen see it. She took a step closer, placing her hands on the desk. She met Helen's eyes without flinching. "I'm not leaving." Helen's smile faltered, just for a second. Then, she laughed softly. "Oh, Emily, you're brave. Stupid, but brave." She rose from her chair, walking around the desk. Then she whispered just inches from Emily's face. "Do you really think you can beat me?" Her voice was low, venomous. "I own this town." She tilted her head. "I have buried people for less than what you've done. I have made families disappear. I have burned homes to the ground." Her breath was warm against Emily's cheek as she murmured, "And you're just a girl with nowhere to go." Emily didn't move. She didn't blink. And then, she whispered back, "You're afraid of me." Helen's expression froze. Emily saw it, a flicker of something. Fear. Just for a second. And that was all Emily needed. She smirked. "You wouldn't be trying so hard to get rid of me if I wasn't a threat." She took a step back. "And that means I already won." Helen's fingers twitched. Her jaw tightened. But when she spoke, her voice was controlled once again. "I admire your confidence." She stepped back toward her desk. "Let's see how long it lasts." Then she smiled. "Because I haven't even started yet." Emily turned and walked toward the door. She had done what she came here to do. She had looked Helen in the eye and refused to back down. But as she left the house, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Because Helen never lost. And Emily had just declared war. The air in Cedar Creek felt heavier than usual. Something had shifted. Emily had stood up to Helen, and now the town was going to make her pay for it. Emily stepped onto the porch, half expecting something waiting for her. More dead animals. Another message. A shattered window. But instead, the silence was worse. Because it wasn't just whispers anymore. It was a decision. The town had made up its mind. They weren't going to scare her away. They were going to erase her. She walked into town, feeling the shift immediately. When she stepped into the bakery, the owner, a woman who had once smiled at her every morning, turned her back. "Sorry," she muttered. "We're all out of bread." But Emily could see the loaves behind the counter. At the grocer's, the man refused to take her money. At the well, women stepped away when she approached. Even the blacksmith, a man who had never cared for gossip, refused to look at her as he hammered away. The town had decided. Emily Carter did not exist. When Emily returned home, James was waiting on the porch. His blind eyes stared ahead, as if he knew what had happened. "You went into town." It wasn't a question. Emily set down the empty basket. "They're cutting me off," she admitted. James nodded slowly. "They won't stop there." His voice was calm but firm. "They'll turn to violence next." Emily felt a chill. "How do you know?" James' fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. "Because I've seen it before." Cedar Creek had always belonged to Helen. Her family had built it. Her name was written into its history. And anyone who crossed her, they were erased. She had destroyed families, bankrupted businesses, turned lifelong friends against each other. And no one ever spoke about it, because fear kept them silent. "She's testing you," James murmured. "Seeing how long you'll last before you break." Emily stared at the ground. She wouldn't break. She couldn't. Because once she gave in, Helen would win. And Emily hadn't fought this hard to lose. That night, the real war began. Emily was washing dishes when she heard it, a rustling outside. Then, the sharp crack of breaking glass. Her body reacted instantly. She grabbed the lantern and rushed to the front door. The sound came from the barn. And then, flames. A bright, burning orange glow. Her heart stopped. She ran, barefoot, across the yard. Smoke choked the air, thick and stinging. The barn was on fire. The animals were screaming. She grabbed a bucket and ran to the well. But when she got there, the rope had been cut. There was no water. They had planned this. Someone had cut the rope before setting the fire, so that when she needed water, there would be none. James appeared at the doorway. Even though he couldn't see, he knew. He heard the fire. He smelled the smoke. And for the first time in years, he roared, "Who did this?" His voice boomed through the night. But no one answered, because they were already gone. By morning, the barn was nothing but ash. The animals dead. The land scarred. Emily stood in the ruins, her fists clenched. She had been prepared for whispers, for rumors, for insults. But this was a declaration of war. And Helen had just made a mistake, because she had pushed Emily too far. James sat on the porch, exhausted. The fire had drained him. Emily sat beside him, quiet. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, James turned his face toward her. "What are you going to do?" Emily took a deep breath. She looked at the burned remains of the barn, at the scorched earth, at everything Helen had tried to take from her. And then, she stood. Her voice was steady. "I'm going to fight." James nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Emily had played by their rules. She had stayed quiet. She had waited for them to stop. But now she was going to fight back. And this time, she wasn't going to lose. The embers still smoldered in the wreckage of the barn, a reminder, a warning, a challenge. And Emily Carter was done being afraid. James sat on the porch, his blind eyes fixed straight ahead. Emily knelt beside him. "I'm not running, James." He nodded. "I know." Emily's voice hardened. "But I'm not just going to survive this." She stood, dusting off her hands. "I'm going to make Helen regret ever coming after me." Helen Thompson was untouchable, but even the most powerful people had weaknesses, and Emily was going to find hers. She started asking questions, not openly, not where Helen's spies could hear, but quietly in places where whispers carried weight. The blacksmith's wife refused to speak at first, but then she muttered, "You didn't hear this from me, but Helen's got enemies." Emily leaned in. "Who?" The woman hesitated. Then, "Daniel knew something, before he died." Emily's breath caught. Her husband had known something? Something about Helen? That night, Emily tore through the house. She opened every drawer, every shelf, every locked box. And finally, at the bottom of Daniel's old toolbox, she found a leather-bound notebook. Daniel's handwriting covered the pages. Names, dates, transactions, and one line underlined 3 times. Helen's secret is in the records. Emily flipped through the journal, scanning every detail. And then, she saw it, a hidden ledger, a record of bribes, stolen land, and names of people who had mysteriously disappeared. Helen had built her empire on corruption and lies, and Daniel had been tracking it all, before he was killed. Emily's heart pounded. Helen hadn't just wanted her gone, she had needed Emily to disappear, because Daniel had gotten too close to the truth. And now, Emily had the proof to bring her down. By morning, rumors had started spreading. People saw Emily talking to the blacksmith's wife. People saw her asking questions. And by noon, people were talking about her again. But this time, it wasn't whispers of disgust. It was curiosity, doubt, fear. And Helen noticed, because by sundown, she was standing at Emily's doorstep. Emily opened the door. Helen stood there, her smile razor sharp. Her voice was calm but dripping with venom. "I hear you've been asking questions, Emily." Emily leaned against the doorframe. "You hear a lot, don't you?" Helen's smile didn't waver. "You don't know what you're doing." Her voice lowered. "You don't know what kind of fire you're playing with." Emily crossed her arms. "You killed my husband to keep your secret." Helen's smile finally faltered. "Just for a second." Emily stepped closer. "And now I have the truth." Helen's fingers curled into fists. "You have nothing?" Her voice was ice cold. "But if you keep going, you won't live long enough to regret it." She turned sharply, stepping off the porch. But before she left, she called over her shoulder. "Say your goodbyes, Emily, because you're not making it out of this town alive." The door clicked shut. Emily stood in the silence, her pulse racing. She could leave. She could take the baby and run before it was too late. But then she thought about Daniel, about James, about everyone Helen had destroyed. And she knew. She was going to end this, once and for all. Helen Thompson was going to fall, and Emily Carter was going to be the one to bring her down. The sky over Cedar Creek was heavy with storm clouds. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath. Because today, Helen Thompson's empire was about to crumble, and Emily Carter was holding the match. Emily sat at the old wooden table, Daniel's journal open in front of her. She had spent the night memorizing every page, names, transactions, land deals that never should have been legal, people who had crossed Helen and disappeared, and most damning of all, proof that Helen had been bribing the sheriff, controlling the law, controlling everything. James Carter sat across from her, his blind eyes fixed straight ahead. He listened as Emily read out the details. Every stolen acre of land, every business she had forced out, every man who had mysteriously died or vanished, and finally the payments to the sheriff. A ledger so detailed, it couldn't be denied. When Emily finished, she looked up. James' voice was quiet, but steady. "How do you plan to use this?" Emily exhaled. "I'm going to show the town what she really is." James nodded once. "Then do it." The town square was packed by noon. People gathered, sensing something was coming. The air was tense. And then, Emily appeared, standing on the steps of the old courthouse, holding Daniel's journal in her hands. The moment they saw her, the whispers started, but Emily didn't flinch. She raised her voice for all to hear. "For years, this town has lived under a lie." She opened the journal, and she read names, dates, how Helen had stolen from them, how she had used them, how she had killed to protect her power. And then, the final blow, the sheriff's name, the bribes, the cover-ups, and how Daniel had died because of what he knew. The town fell silent. Then, chaos. People shouted, cursed Helen's name. Some denied it. Others demanded justice. And in the middle of it all, Helen Thompson arrived. Helen's last stand. She stepped into the square with slow, measured steps. Her expression was unreadable. The storm brewing in the sky mirrored the one in her eyes. But for the first time, she looked uncertain, because she could see it, the shift. The town was turning, and she was losing control. She met Emily's gaze, and then she smiled. "Emily, dear," she said smoothly, "you always were good at telling stories." Emily didn't blink. She stepped forward. "You stole from these people. You destroyed their lives." She held up the journal. "And I have the proof." Helen's smile didn't waver. But proof means nothing if no one acts on it. She turned, her sharp eyes landing on the sheriff. A silent challenge. A reminder that she still owned him. But today was different. The sheriff didn't move, didn't defend her, didn't speak. And that silence was deafening because it meant he knew it was over. And so did Helen. The first person to step forward was the blacksmith. He turned toward the sheriff and said, "Arrest her." Then another voice, then another, a chorus rising into a roar. "Arrest her. Make her pay. We want justice." Helen stepped back, fury flashing across her face. But she had nowhere left to run. She had ruled Cedar Creek through fear. And now, the town was no longer afraid. The sheriff finally took a step forward, and Helen knew she had lost. He pulled out his handcuffs. "Helen Thompson, you're under arrest." The cuffs snapped shut around her wrists. For the first time, Helen's mask cracked. She looked at Emily, eyes burning with hatred. "You think this is over?" she hissed. Emily stepped closer. "I know it is." And then she turned her back on Helen as the sheriff led her away. The storm finally broke. The rain poured over Cedar Creek, washing away the lies, washing away Helen's reign. And for the first time in years, Emily breathed, because she had won. Helen was gone, but the town still had wounds to heal. Emily stayed, not because she had to, but because she chose to, because this was her home, and now she was finally free. Epilogue, A New Dawn. The storm had washed away the past. For the first time in years, Cedar Creek was quiet. No whispers, no fear, no Helen Thompson lurking in the shadows. She was gone, and Emily Carter was still standing. The town didn't change overnight, but it did change. People still looked at Emily when she passed, but now it wasn't with suspicion. It was with something else. Respect, maybe even guilt, because they had almost let Helen destroy her, and they had been too afraid to stop it, until she did. James Carter didn't live to see everything change. His body had grown weak. the years of loss and silence taking their toll. But in the end, he had died free, free from Helen's rule, free from fear, and knowing that Emily had won. At his funeral, the entire town showed up, not because they had to, but because they owed him, because they owed Emily, and they knew it. Weeks later, Emily found something unexpected, hidden inside the lining of Daniel's coat, a letter, faded, written long before he died. She opened it with trembling fingers, and she read, "Emily, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. It means Helen found a way to stop me. But I know you, and if I'm gone, I know you'll pick up where I left off, because you were always braver than me, always stronger. I never told you enough how much I loved you. But if you're reading this, then I need you to do one last thing for me. Live, not in fear, not in someone else's shadow, but truly, fully. Live, Emily, for both of us. Love." Daniel. Emily folded the letter carefully. She pressed it against her chest. Then she took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, she let go. She stayed in Cedar Creek, not because she had something to prove, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was her home, and for the first time, it truly felt like one. The baby, the one left on her doorstep all those months ago, grew up never knowing the weight of Helen Thompson's rule, because Emily had made sure of it. She raised him with love, not fear, and every time she looked at him, she knew Daniel would have been proud. Final words. One evening, Emily stood at the edge of town. The sun was setting over Cedar Creek. Golden light spilled over the rooftops. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and for the first time in forever, she was at peace. She had survived. She had won. And she had done the one thing Daniel had asked of her. She had lived. Emily Carter's story isn't just about surviving lies and cruelty. It's about what happens when one woman refuses to back down, when she dares to face fear, defy power, and speak the truth, no matter the cost. In a world where silence often protects the guilty, Emily chose to fight. And because of her courage, an entire town was forced to open its eyes. The real monsters aren't always hiding in the dark. Sometimes they live next door, masked by respectability, protected by fear. But one voice, one brave soul, can be enough to bring them down. So remember, speak up, stand tall, and never let fear write your story. If this story moved you, made your heart race, or left you thinking about the power of truth, don't let it end here. Hit that like button to show your support for real storytelling. Leave a comment. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that silence isn't strength, and that one voice can change everything. And don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Stories Now, where every week we uncover haunting, untold stories that shake your soul and stir your heart. Because the world needs stories like Emily's, stories that remind us courage isn't loud, it's quiet, relentless, and unstoppable. Click the bell so you never miss a moment. Your next favorite story might be just one notification away.